Northridge. This is also my last year, so yeah. And first and foremost, I just want to say that I am very honored to be presenting my research among all this very important and very fascinating research. So thank you for having me. So my project, has anyone not heard the word namaste used spelled N-O-M before? This caused a lot of confusion the first time I presented this. So namaste is a word, it's a play on the word namaste, which means, well, in the foodie and yoga community, they use this form of the word to discuss food that is kind of enriching in more than just a physical sense. And so that's why I use this word, and so sorry if I caused anyone any confusion. So my project is framed by my interest in orthorexia. Has anyone ever heard of orthorexia before? It's kind of not made it very much into the research literature yet. It's made it kind of into the media. But orthorexia is a fairly newly recognized pattern of disordered eating that is characterized by the systematic and obsessive avoidance of foods that are considered toxic or impure. And as Dr. Stephen Bratman, who coined the term, called it a fixation on righteous eating. So those who have orthorexia, a lot of them come from the holistic healing community that tend to use food as medicine. And so in trying to address physical ailments or anything that feels off by using food, their diets tend to become very, very restrictive. So, for example, they might say oh, I can't eat nightshade vegetables, which are potatoes and eggplants and tomatoes. I have an allergy. And so their diet becomes very, very rigid. The boundaries of their diet become very rigid. And when they commit a transgression, when they eat something that goes outside of those boundaries, they tend to experience very high levels of anxiety, high levels of guilt, and even self-loathing. So orthorexia is not recognized by the DSM yet, but it's kind of gaining traction. So it might in the future. I hope it kind of does, because it's really interesting, and I think it can be very problematic. And the literature that is out there has looked at orthorexia predominantly non-sociologically. So a lot of it has been trying to come up with a diagnostic scale. But some research, has looked at it among groups, and one study found a high prevalence of orthorexia among Ashtanga yoga practitioners. And this to me was so super fascinating. So my project is not specifically on orthorexia, but what I wanted to look at was these experiences of guilt and extreme anxiety associated with food. So in the literature, and I think we can kind of observe this anecdotally too, that the experience of eating food and feeling guilt is fairly common in America. So I don't know, does anyone shop at Trader Joe's? Okay. In their frozen food aisle, they have a box of frozen macaroni and cheese, which I'm a huge fan of. But there's a reduced fat version that is marketed as reduced guilt. So things like this, and chocolate cake is sinful, when we use this language, so we kind of can see if you eat food that you feel you're not supposed to eat, you might experience guilt, and a lot of people do experience guilt. Similarly, Stein and Nemiroff, in their study in 1985, found that people judge others based on their food choices. So I think it was college students, if I remember correctly, they were given vignettes. So they had to read about a fictional person. Oh, this person exercises this much. This person eats these kinds of foods. This person weighs this much and is this tall. And based on those vignettes, they found that the students tended to judge the fictional person more harshly and less feminine if they ate higher fat foods, if they didn't eat healthy foods, if they exercised less. So we kind of can see this, okay, we eat food we don't think we should eat, we experience guilt. We see other people eating food that we don't think they should eat. We judge them based on those choices. And so, kind of going from this study that found orthorexia to be very prevalent in the yoga community, my thought was, well, if these experiences, like, these are experienced to an extreme degree for people who have orthorexia, but if these experiences are common in the general population, then are they in any way related to practicing yoga? So, in looking at these rigid patterns of eating, I wanted to see if this relationship exists between these, rigid dietary patterns and yoga, then in which direction might this relationship go? Does someone do yoga, and does something about the yoga community influence someone to develop these rigid patterns? Or does someone who might have a tendency to restrict their diet in one way or another, are they in any way ushered into the yoga community, or is there anything that might lead them to going into the yoga community? So, in looking at, in kind of wondering this, I used an identity theory framework. So identity theory posits that we have all these identities inside of us, and they kind of exist in us at the same time, but they exist in a hierarchy. So some identities are more prominent, meaning they are more important to us, and some identities are more salient, meaning that they are more likely to be called upon across situations. And these identities are based on identity meanings. So we have all these meanings that are associated with this identity, and we expect that the behavior would correspond with the identity meanings. So in this line, Strachan and Brawley found that having a healthy eater identity did predict health behaviors, and specifically the consumption of healthy foods. So fruits and vegetables and things like that. So my research question, kind of based on all this, is can whether or not a person practices yoga be accurately predicted based on knowledge of their feelings of guilt associated with eating unhealthy foods, their perceived judgment by others associated with eating unhealthy foods, meaning to what degree do they feel that others will judge them if they eat unhealthy foods, and their kind of overall healthy eater identity. So if they have a healthy eater identity, and if that healthy eater identity is both prominent and salient for them. And my hypotheses were that individuals who report higher levels of guilt are more likely to practice yoga, that individuals who feel more strongly that others will judge them based on their food choices are more likely to practice yoga, and that individuals who identify as a healthy eater are more likely to practice yoga. So and this was also for a project for last year, and so I put together a survey. I used some existing scales, identity standard, prominence, and salience measures to look at the healthy eater identity. And then I also used scales that have been used in the research literature to look at orthorexia. And I used those not because I wanted to diagnose my respondents with orthorexia, but because the scales, they really speak to those aspects of orthorexia, the anxiety, the dietary rigidity, feelings of being judged, and those feelings of guilt. And that's why I use those scales. So very quickly, I posted the survey on Qualtrics. It was distributed online via Facebook, Twitter, and fish.net. One of my professors is he's like a fish fan. I think he runs like a fan page. And so he was like, yeah, I'll distribute it. And he put it on fish.net. So, and I got a fairly small sample size for the project. For the purposes of the class, I was very excited to have 140 respondents. But, this was an exploratory study. So the small sample size is okay, but, would have been more ideal to have more people. But my gender distribution, I was very happy with 42% male to 58% female. I think that's a pretty good ratio. The mean age was 42 years. I think the oldest person who took it was about 88. So that was pretty cool too. So my results show that feelings of guilt and feeling judged by others were not significant results. They did not significantly predict whether or not a person practiced yoga, but having a healthy eater identity did. And this, the guilt, whenever you do a study, you want to find significant results, right? So that was kind of a bummer with the feelings of guilt and feeling judged. But the healthy eater identity is really super interesting to me because research has shown in the past that having a healthy eater identity predicts your health behaviors. So predicting your health behaviors in terms of what you eat, but now here also in terms of what activities you engage in. This study found that guilt and judgment might not predict practicing yoga, but a healthy eater identity might. In my study, it did. My study was limited, of course. It was a small sample size. I did not have good diversity in terms of race and ethnicity or in terms of income, but I think income and practicing yoga, there's certainly, at least in Los Angeles, I'm from Los Angeles, so at least in Los Angeles, like, there's definitely a connection there. But I think that future research should look into orthorexia in general, which is kind of like a dream of mine in the someday future. But also that research should look at the healthy eater identity, because identity theory posits that our behaviors correspond with our identity meanings, but there's also other aspects. There's social aspects, there's psychological aspects, and I think that research should look at the outcomes of the healthy eater identity and how these kind of feed back into identity as a looping system, as kind of a cybernetic system of behavior and identity verification and non-verification. And this is what I am trying to do with my thesis, which I'm starting this year. So my thesis is looking at the behavioral, the social, and the psychological outcomes of a healthy eater identity. Hopefully next year I can report back on my findings, but I'm only in the proposal phase right now, so I don't know what directions the study is going to go in. But that is that.